Welcome to the Vinnie Mark podcast, a collection of interviews with thought leaders of the wine world, brought to you by Vinnie Mark.
You're looking at a piece of history when you cut a tree down like that. You look at the face of the log and you can see through the years climate change and climate events where the rings tell a story. The lifespan can be up to 250 to 270 years. The microflora that lives within the stave yard is then introduced to the wood, and it grows on the wood and in the wood and creates precursors to the flavor profiles we're going to look for when we then toast the barrel. We source the oak from Carpathian Mountains, which are a volcanic mountain. It creates the spiciness that you don't get from French oak.
That was the voice of Mark Goldsworthy, the sales manager for Chene South Africa, a subsidiary of Chene & Key based in Paris, France. In today's episode, Mark chats to me about the state of oak barrels in wine and some of his verdicts on the countless debates that rage around this topic. Mark, thank you so much for being willing to talk to me today.
I wanted to just look at the history of wine. The reason that wine barrels were first used is very different to why they are still used today. I wondered if you could just draw a line between those 2 points.
The actual barrel was developed to get product from home base in Europe or Britain to the colonies. And I think over time, people realized that the product developed and matured in the vessel. A voyage that was in the vessel and ended up at the other side being in a much better state or a much better quality of product. I mean, we're all using a transport cask, which was developed to be able to be transported across the oceans, which is a thicker stave. In France, they like to use what they call a chateau barrel, which is a thinner stave. But now with modern transport methods, and we can get chateau barrels here without a problem, and transport barrels are used. So we have two different stave thicknesses that are quite common in the wine industry.
Okay, so it's fascinating. The transport barrels were obviously thicker and more sturdy because they went through a kind of rougher process as opposed to just sitting in the cellar of a chateau somewhere. Is there a sensory difference that you've noticed in wines that are matured in a chateau barrel as opposed to a transport barrel?
A thinner stave barrel generally allows a faster maturation time horizon, whereas a thicker stave takes a bit longer. Sometimes the winemakers enjoy a thicker stave. It gives them tannin complexity that they like over the thinner stave. Those have all become more modern things because we have the ability to have both. It was not a choice back 100 odd years ago.
And does maturation in a thicker stave barrel take longer because there's slower micro-oxygenation? I mean, what's the science behind that?
Sure. So there's further to travel for the air to get it to micro-oxygenate. There's also much more raw wood involved. So the wine moves in the wood differently in a thicker stave than in a thinner stave. And so as the wine, if you can imagine a person breathing, wine also breathes in and out of the wood. There's more way to go to the outside world through a thicker stave than there is through a thinner stave. It's just the physics of it. There's definitely differences in how the wine matures in the two different staves.
You said something interesting there. You said the wine breathes in and out of the wood. We spend loads of time talking about all the flavor compounds that oak imparts into the wine, but in the reverse of that, what does oak take out of the wine? Because obviously once a red wine has been in a barrel, the inside of the barrel is a different color. So I assume it's removing anthocyanins, but what effect does that have on the actual wine?
These are very technical questions, so it gets quite difficult to if you go, the general long and the short of that, of what you're asking is that wine, oak matures and softens natural grape tannin, and makes the wine more round and softer, and imparts a lot and a number of different compounds to the wine through the toast that's being put to the wood, and the interaction of the chemically of the wine with the envelope of the first sort of 5 to 6 mils of the barrel is really where the wine is penetrating and working together with the oak tannin and imparting those flavors to the wine. And so with the seasons changing and the pressures changing, and with air pressure as cold fronts and high pressure systems move through, the wine moves in and out of the wood, and the amount of movement in and out of the wood that will determine the amount of extraction of those tannins and toast to the wine. Yeah, there's a lot to it. It's a very technical space, and you can sit and talk about it for quite a while, but if you just imagine, this is where toast also becomes important. So we offer various different toasts, and some of them are long and deep, and some of them are hotter and so. And depending on the toast level of the barrel and the conditions in your cellar, these will all guide the amount of extraction and complexity that ends up in your wine.
Sure.
Should we talk about toasting just for a little bit? Am I correct in saying that at a surface level, kind of like eating actual toast, the darker it is, the more you taste the kind of carbon compound, which can be caramels, etc., and heavier caramels, and the lighter the toast, the more subtle the effect. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes and no. It depends on or again, the variables matter. If you're trying to make a very complex wine and a very big wine, you're going to want to have a lot of natural wood tannin that's going to impart into that wine to let it age in the bottle. So you're going to want to go medium toast. And then if you're making lighter style wines, the natural thing would be then to toast lighter. But in actual fact, when you go deep and long in toasting, you bring out more fruit character and it's more elegant on your wine. So the blend of those two toasts in the same wine can actually be quite interesting. It's not necessarily that you should only use one type of toast. People do, but it is interesting to blend the two and on the same wine, and you get two different aspects of the wine coming. So you're getting your tannin backbone, structure backbone from the medium toast, and your fruit profile from the lighter toast, or what we call a low-long toast. So those two things are quite important to understand. But then also your terroir and where your grapes are grown determines also what kind of toast you would use. So if you're growing on a very light soil that doesn't create a lot of structure in the grapes naturally, you are overpowered by putting a medium toast. You would rather want to go on the lower toast and accentuate that fruit character. And the wine will be a lot more elegant and more in style than it will be going with the medium toast.
Yeah, fascinating. And you mentioned
one doesn't want to really taste. You were mentioning sort of carbon and those kind of things. We want the toast not to be one side. We aim for what we call integration. So the fruit profile of the wine and the terroir expression of the wine, ideally at the end of the process, should be showcased, and the wood is just there to support it in the background. So ideally you don't want to be relying on the wood and the toast for any of the sort of, the showcase flavors. They're the supporting act, and the actual chemical reactions that have gone on in the barrel during the maturation and the softening of the tannins and the creating of length and complexity. That's really where the quality of the barrel shines. We want to lift up the terroir and the sense of place of the wine from where it's made and the winemakers that have made it.
Fascinating. You mentioned a long, deep toast. When you say deep, do you mean that certain heat applications can allow to occur deeper into the wood while others operate on a surface, or is that not what you meant?
No, that's correct. You'll find that, for example, a medium toast will penetrate maybe 4 mil into the wood, and a long deep toast will penetrate 6 to 8 mil into the wood. But those two differences are quite big, and it's all to do with temperature and length of time. And that's the temperature and length of time on the fire. So we at Taranto only fire toast, or Taranto, Canton, and Cadar only fire toast. Some do convection toasting, some do a preheat and then a convection and then a fire. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it, but we only fire toast and fire bend. Yes, if you have a hotter fire and you want to achieve a deeper toast, then you're going to end up charring the outside of the wood and not necessarily toast the deeper into the wood. So naturally you would have to lower the temperature of the fire so that the temperature inside the wood raises and toasts deeper.
Yeah, can we talk about sustainability for a little bit? One of the objections that has popped up from people promoting concrete tanks or stainless steel tanks or concrete eggs have said, well, how can you support a system that involves deforestation, essentially, from the French fire forests? But I believe there is another side to that story about how the French manage these fire forests. Can you tell us a little bit about how they approach sustainability, given that their job is chopping down trees?
So the French forest is managed by the ONF, which essentially translates to the Office of National Forestry. This office was established many years ago, and it was established primarily to manage the sustainability of French forests. And so they very carefully control what gets cut down, when it gets cut down, what gets left to then reestablish. And there's a process that they require the guys to manage the forest through its lifetime so that it produces oak trees of a certain quality for coopering and for timber and for all the other things that oak is used for. And this process basically starts with hundreds of thousands of young trees in the beginning, and they thin them out through the process through the lifespan of that block and that can be up to 250 to 270 years. Where over a slow process of thinning the trees, they grow straight and long with the competition, and then later they take the competition out. And those trees that are cut are sold for timber, for many different things like furniture and construction and all of that over the years. And so they only select the best trees to stay. And so by the end of 250 years, you have on average about 45 trees left per hectare. And these trees are then sold on the auctions to the cooperages and whoever else is on the auction. We've had instances where people looking for flooring come and buy Cooper quality wood, but this is generally the buyers for our stave mills will be sent a list of plots that are for sale, which will be sold on the auction. And they go around and literally grade each tree and value each tree and put a price on each tree of that plot. And the auctions are silent. It's not a bidding auction. They put forward a price in secret, and then the ONF then announce who the winner of the winning bid is. So the buyers are quite talented at spotting the quality of a tree while it's still standing and working out what they're willing to pay. And just an anecdote, one of our buyers in the Chene forest, he's well known he has a little signature that he puts on his bids so that everybody else knows that he's outbidding them. A little code that he always puts on there, and then they know it's him. But they also, when they go around grading the trees, once they've received their messages from the ONF, then they each have a little symbol which they mark each tree by spray painting so that you can see which buyers from which companies have already been and are looking at the same plot of wood that you're also looking at. Right. But it's very well managed, and the whole goal of the ONF is sustainability. So they are wanting to make sure that over the years you don't cut more than you have, and there's always enough wood coming through the program that it all stays in balance. And so no, it's not a deforestation thing, not at all. And in fact, nothing can be further from the truth. They're very aware of the need to keep the trees in a rotation so that all the industries that require wood are getting what they need, and the forest is still there in the next 250 years and years after that.
I mean, that's pretty wild. People who say that wine is just a drink like any other. I mean, just realizing that you need roughly 7 or 8 generations of humans to cooperate together to create these storage vessels. I mean, that is pretty mind-blowing. Forget the amazing alchemy and chemistry of winemaking itself. It's like just to keep those trees in the ground and this common goal that is shared across hundreds of years to get these trees to maturity. I find that quite magical.
No, it's a great story. The experience of going to the forests and seeing how they tell the story of all the trees. When they log them, you look at the face of the log and you can see through the years climate change and climate events where the rings tell a story, and they've got boxes of bullets and things from the war that were in the forest and that they find when they're splitting the logs. So you're looking at a piece of history when you cut a tree down like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you were also saying that Taranto does, sometimes as many as you said 6 seasons, where I assume they are left outside to cure. Can you tell us a little bit about why they have to wait that long? Is 6 seasons 6 years?
So we talk about seasoning oak. And so there's varying ways one can do that. So the trees are logged and taken to our stave mills. And the stave mills split the wood and create staves from the logs. And those staves are then packed into like towers, pallets, where they've each got a gap between them. And they then shipped to the cooperage to be put into the stave yard. And we've spent an awful lot of time in research and development on our recipe of how we move our wood around the stave yard. We have a nursery in the middle of the stave yard, which has been planted with trees all the way around the sides, because we realized a few years ago that our young staves were drying too quickly in the summer winds, and it was creating problems with cracking of the staves later. So we now control the way that we dry our young staves before they move into the bigger stave yard. And each year that the staves sit in the stave yard, they leach out tannin, they leach out a lot of stuff. And then also the microflora that lives within the stave yard is then introduced to the wood, and it grows on the wood and in the wood and creates precursors to the flavor profiles we're going to look for when we then toast the barrel.
So there's a microbial process that goes on while these staves are being seasoned.
Oh, yes. And that microflora that is in your stave yard is very, how do you say it? It's like your sort of strain. It gives your house flavor. In our Kedar stave yard, we cut fingers into the forest, and the staves are actually stacked into the forest from the cooperage, so that the microflora of the forest that we are using works on seasoning the oak that we're going to eventually use as barrels. This is very important. That creates our DNA, really.
I mean, you mentioned Kedar, and we've been talking thus far as if oak is this generic thing, but as you just hinted at, France has 5 different forests that supposedly have 5 different characters, and then you're saying each kind of timber yard has its own microflora. But forget about those differences. There's an entire planet with loads of countries producing oak, and yet best people talk about the difference between French and American, but you represent French oak, American oak, Hungarian oak, and I believe that Kedar is the oldest cooperage in Hungary. Is that correct?
I don't know if it's the oldest one, but it's been going with us since 1730. They produce very high quality Hungarian oak barrels. Hungarian oak got a bit more of a flavor profile that winemakers are maybe not excited about anymore. It creates this really interesting spiciness and savoriness that you don't get from French oak. And particularly on some red cultivars, and for sure on things like Chenin Blanc, we're having great success with it. And it's an interesting tool in one's toolbox. So we source the oak from the northeast of the country and the Carpathian Mountains, which are a volcanic mountain. The soil profile has a topsoil of only 60 to 70 centimeters, and then the rest is just volcanic rock. So the trees take an awful lot of time to grow, and they're about half the size diameter-wise of their French counterparts. And the oak is extremely dense, and the grain is some of the tightest that we know of in the world. In terms of red wine, Kedar and the sort of heavier cultivars like Cabernet is very nice. The more bolder flavors work well with Kedar, so that's where we focus our attention on using Kedar and the red wines.
Is tightness of grain a kind of straight line graph that's directly correlated, so tighter grain equals better always, or is it a little more nuanced than that?
Tighter grain is complexity and extends maturation time. So the tighter the grain, the more time you need in the oak. So yes, it's good for quality, but what you're trying to achieve as a winemaker and the time horizon that you have also determines what kind of grain you're going to need. So if you're wanting to age something a little quicker, something that has a wider grain is going to give you a much more character than a tight grain. Grain selection for your specific needs is important, but definitely the tighter the grain, the more complexity and quality your wine will be.
And is it fair to say that the tighter the grain, the more expensive the barrel?
Grain selection does equal a little bit of cost, but the big cost comes in time of seasoning. So a 3-year seasoned barrel versus a 5-year seasoned barrel is where the cost implication is going to come in, because obviously that stock is bought 3 years ago and then used, or 5 years ago and used. So it's sitting in your own inventory for that amount of time after you've already paid for the oak. But yes, grain selection does equal a little bit of cost. It is a lot more premium because not everything is extra tight grain. There's a lot of tight grain and medium grain around. Those are a bit cheaper. But yeah, as far as cost goes, length of time in seasoning yard is where the cost implications come.
So before we move on from Hungarian oak, I did want to ask, are you allowed to name any wines that our listeners can track down that may have been matured purely in Hungarian oak?
It's difficult. I've got various clients using it, but no one's using it 100%. And there's a reason for that. I said earlier, this is a tool in your toolbox, bringing a specific kind of character to your wine. So you don't often find someone using 100% Hungarian. I don't know of anybody doing that locally, but it is a definite flavor profile that's gathering steam. I'm excited for it. Definitely looking for more people to experiment with it.
I did sit in a fascinating tasting with a Riojan producer, and he'd taken his harvest of Tempranillo grapes, matured them in Russian oak, French oak, and American oak for the exact amount of time. And the kind of difference between American and French was very obvious in the sense that the American was a slightly more overt influence. But the difference between Russian and French was quite hard to discern. And maybe we were all just a bunch of numpties tasting it there, but there were quite a few very very seasoned industry professionals at that tasting. And then I got told that Russian oak is, 60% of the cost of French oak. I was quite confused. What is the problem? Why is French oak still king? Why is it top of the pile despite being considerably more expensive than options like Russian oak, which don't have a very distinct profile like Hungarian oak, for example?
There's various things at play. So global geopolitics is a big thing. When Ukraine was invaded, they stopped selling wood. China stopped selling wood and gone searching for it in other countries. But for me, the French oak forests they're a terroir, a certain soil type, a certain climate that produces flavor precursors that we're looking for in wine. And you'll be able to tell the quality of French oak versus anything else. That's just why people keep going back to French oak and why it's in demand. It's not to say that Russian oak is necessarily bad, but the French have been doing it for centuries and have really dialed in the process of growing trees and have the terroir and the areas that they know work.
I was just interested to know your experience of this trend, especially with critics seemingly demanding less obvious oak or at least better integrated oak. And a lot of premium winemakers at least are shifting away from wood towards concrete tanks or concrete eggs or amphora. Is this a sort of 1% problem where it's really only critics and some progressive winemakers where the rest of the world just keeps on loving buttery Chardonnays? Or is there a shift in the South African wine scene away from oak?
The consumer at the end of the day gets excited about certain styles of wine and then starts buying those certain styles and not others. And it's almost like a reaction from a business point of view then to start making wines that people want to drink. And the critics do drive this popularity of a certain style and make it interesting and create interest around that. And so then the public starts to drink those styles of wines, and so it goes. Just generally, since I've been involved with wine, the percentage of new wood used has dropped considerably, but the quality of the barrels being bought now is going up. So they're upselling to better quality, but less of. But then again, if you followed the wine industry for any amount of time, it is about trends, right? For 5 years, Sauvignon Blanc will be in, and then Sauvignon Blanc's not so in anymore, and then it's something else. So we do follow those, but you'll see the identities of the different wine estates still remains true to their flagship wines and their wine styles. And so, yes, some lines will change to accommodate drinking styles, but they're still buying barrels for their main flagship wines and their ultra premium stuff. Yes, there's still a barrel market. Yes, barrels are still in demand. Maybe not as much as they were in the early 2000s, but still high quality, good quality oak is being sought after.
So I remember maybe a decade or so ago listening to some critics talk about how they tasted a wine and they're like, oh, you can taste the oak chips. But it feels like the oak alternatives for perhaps a mid-tier wine that wants to have some oak influence but just can't justify the expense of a barrel, it feels like these oak alternatives are getting more and more nuanced. And I was reading about the fact that even oak staves that get put into plastic tanks are now seasoned in this exact same way that they would season barrel staves. And products like the Flex Cube, which is a plastic fermentation tank, actually can come with a highly predictable and accurate micro-oxygenation rate. So these vessels seem like they're doing everything that an oak barrel can do. Am I correct in that? Or is there still a distinct difference when you taste the difference between a barrel and a wine matured under staves?
You're right in saying we put a lot of time and effort into our alternatives ranges. Obviously, it's part of our sustainability where we use more of the tree now than we used to because we can cut the other sections that are not suitable for staves. We can cut to use as chips and staves and other products. You've mentioned a number of different products to age wine in, and it's very personalized to say whether you can taste it or not. Some people are going to say they can and others are going to say they can't. I think the general trend more than anything else is around cost. New wood barrels are expensive and the margins are being squeezed around the world. Everyone is looking at ways to create a quality product at the best cost. And like I said, the ultra premium stuff is still going to new wood barrels, whereas the more entry level stuff, we're finding a lot of a demand for our staves, for our barrel inserts, where instead of throwing a barrel out after 10 years, the barrel's being retained and inserts are being put inside the barrel to help give a bit more oak impact and extend the lifespan of the barrel.
Have you ever set up blind tastings with clients in order to show the merit of the oak alternatives?
We do tastings, and we have little tester kits that we go and sit with the clients and put different wines onto different types of stave so that we can come up with a combination that works for them. We now and again do tastings where you have wines done only in barrel versus wines done partly in barrel, partly with staves versus wines that are only on stave. And these different wines are interesting to taste, but again, it comes to what you're trying to achieve. Just because it tastes better than 100% barrel doesn't mean it's cost effective for your entry level wine that you're trying to produce. And yeah, maybe in a tasting you can sit and taste the difference, but the person who buys your wine off the shelf is not going to sit with the 4 samples in front of them and say, oh, actually it doesn't taste as good.
No, for sure. I think there's so much bad science wrapped in thick blankets of romance in the wine industry that I love the idea of just, putting these things out and actually letting people taste and talk and, settle it once and for all. So I get what you're saying. I'm more trying to understand whether they're at a chemical level is a different process. As I said, if you've got staves that have been seasoned from a French forest and they are also in a container that has a controlled rate of microoxygenation, one wonders where the difference may come in.
Yeah, it's so subjective and objective, I guess. When you have the ability to sit with the samples next to each other and rate them one way or the next, is a fortunate position to be in. Not everybody buying a bottle of wine off the shelf has that position to be in. So then if they buy a wine and they like it, however you got to be at that point, it's still a quality wine at a great price and the consumer enjoys it. That's ultimately what you're looking for. I think when I speak about the toolbox is deep and the variables are many, ultimately it comes down to what you want as a business to create and put on the shelf. And of course you want your end consumer to like what you put out there and choose it above the other myriad of different options.
Yeah, that's exactly why you're developing the oak alternative section of the business. Maybe a follow-on question from that is, what are some of the oak alternatives that you've seen pop up in the market that excite you the most? Is there some exciting innovation in the area of oak alternatives?
So the innovation or the improvement in quality has gone largely to wood specifically for alternatives. It's not an off-cut piece of plank from the cooperage that they throw one way and that bin and just gets made into alternatives. We do it with intent and we source quality wood. So we've got all of our ranges of barrel wood. We have the same ranges of barrel are available as alternatives and staves and granular and as chips. For example, the Chene forest, we have Chene wood and barrel and we have Chene sticks, staves and all the rest. Innovation is happening in seasoning, working out how to make the quality of the alternatives better. We sell mainly what we call sticks, which are a square 22 by 22 mold by 900, which allows a lot of nice raw wood in the middle. So it's toasted on the outside, but it has the raw wood in the middle. And the wine interacts with that raw wood and the toast, which is similar to a barrel. This is for us, gives a very barrel-like result. And then also gives the winemaker the ability to have 2 or 3 different toast profiles in the same tank. So you can take a medium toast, a medium plus toast, and a fire toasted terroir and throw them all in the same tank in different ratios, and it'll give you an exciting result. Whereas a barrel, you only have 1 toast and 1 wood selection, 1 grain selection. And it's also used on a much more quicker time horizon. So if that makes sense, we can work from 4 months through to 12 months, whereas a barrel maturation can end up at 22 months. But of course, then the quality of wine that's ending up in a barrel maturation at 22 months is going to be different to the quality of wine that you're using sticks and staves in a tank for up to 12 months.
If you were to articulate the difference between these staves, which really sound rather impressive, as opposed to oak chips, but from a sensory perspective?
It's not necessarily for me about the sensory difference, it's about the use. So chips we generally use on the fermentation side of winemaking, and then once it's done with the fermentation side, then the chips go out and the wine is racked onto something else. So it's an initial treatment. There are some that would use chips further down in the extended maturation process and tank. But I think that we always end up with a really round, smooth, long finish, and that's where we're looking to add value. A barrel finish is of course going to have similar attributes, but it's going to taste slightly different. I think the days are gone where alternatives had a bad rap in tasting planky, and you often heard people say, oh, it tastes planky and it can taste the staves. Those days are gone. All the guys playing in the alternatives market have progressed from there quite considerably now.
Did I understand you correctly that you could potentially have a premium red wine that is fermented in stainless steel tanks has some chips added in during fermentation and would then be matured in a barrel after that, or is that overkill?
Yeah, you can 100% do that. It's that's the versatility of using these different products, and that's because an oak contact during fermentation gives a different character to the wine. You often have barrel fermented Chardonnay. It gives a different character.
I just have one parting question, which perhaps only has relevance for our South African listeners, but there are many conflicting legends surrounding the birth of coffee chocolate pinotage, and some say that it was a magical mistake that was discovered the next morning fortuitously, and the god of wine had bestowed upon the world a blessing in this accidental creation of chocolate pinotage. And then the other side is that it was a very carefully controlled scientific process to trigger certain compounds. So what is the truth about these coffee chocolate things? Is it purely a very dark toast in the barrel, or is it an interaction between toasting the barrel and certain cultivars?
Oh man, I'm not going to comment on that. You can come up with many ideas on that. I've spoken to a lot of guys and have relative knowledge on how they do that, but that's a flavor profile that the consumer is looking for, and the winemaking team and the wood suppliers have gone out to achieve with the winemaking team. There's a lot going on there, and I think that's where I'm going to leave those comments out.
So two things. One, am I understanding correctly saying that it's unlikely that would have happened by mistake?
No, I'm not saying that at all. It could have been anything is possible. If they were trying to create something and they did a certain recipe on a certain clone or something like that, and it gave them that result, and they suddenly hit on something and decided, you know what, this tastes like chocolate, I think we need to sell it as chocolate pinotage, then that's it. But yeah.
Well, the other thing I'm picking up from you is that the coffee chocolate pinotage mafia are a powerful and dangerous bunch that you dare not cross, and that's why you're refraining from commenting.
I wouldn't even be calling them a mafia, but it's a very closely guarded discussion topic, which I'm not really wanting to get into.
That's fine. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating. I obviously have loads more questions, but I think we are well over the time you agreed to give us. So thanks for being so generous.
Only a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, and it's been great, man.
We've reached the end of another episode of the ViniMark podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to the ViniMark channel so that you can join us for more conversations around wine commerce, wine science, cellar mastery, marketing, and the rising trends amidst the industry's more adventurous pioneers.